What happens when one of Hollywood's most fearless icons walks onto a talk show known for chaos and fiery opinions? What happens when Samuel L. Jackson, a man whose voice alone can command a room into silence, sits across from Joy Behar, a host who never backs down from a verbal swing? Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe to Talk Flair and like and comment to keep these explosive stories coming your way. Now, let's step into the room where tension thickened like smoke before anyone even realized a fire had started. The studio lights burned bright above the stage as the audience settled, buzzing with the energy that only a live taping of The View could generate. The cameras glided across the set like silent predators, capturing every angle, every breath, every twitch of expression. Joy Behar adjusted her glasses, flipping through her cards with that familiar half-smirk she wore before she launched into a point she knew would stir the pot. Sunny Hostin whispered to Sarah Haynes, her eyes scanning the crowd as if she already sensed something unusual in the air. And then Samuel L. Jackson walked out. The audience erupted, some cheering with awe, others standing instinctively as though saluting a commander. He strode across the stage with that cool, unhurried confidence that had defined decades of unforgettable roles. He wore a sharp black jacket over a deep maroon shirt, a pairing that somehow made the entire set look underdressed. As he sat in the guest chair, he offered a nod to the hosts. But even that simple gesture carried weight, like he was quietly claiming the room. Samuel L. Jackson. Whoopi Goldberg announced with that big, booming laugh of hers. "We're so excited to have you here." Jackson smiled. "Glad to be here. Always a trip." Joy Behar leaned forward before anyone else could speak. "Well, Samuel, we've got a lot to talk about today," she said, tapping her stack of cards with theatrical flair. "Especially that new movie of yours. People are calling it bold, political, even provocative." He raised a brow, amused. "People call everything political these days. It's a movie. It has a point of view." Joy tilted her head, already gearing up for her usual line of questioning. "But don't you think actors, especially actors with a platform like yours, should be careful not to get too?" He held up one hand, barely a few inches off his knee, but the gesture landed like a thunderclap. "Careful," he repeated. "About telling stories?" Sarah exchanged a glance with Sunny as Whoopi shifted in her seat. The air, only minutes into the interview, was tightening with anticipation. The audience leaned in, sensing the spark. Joy didn't back off. She never did. "Well, yeah," she said. "You know how audiences can be. You say the wrong thing, suddenly it's a headline. Suddenly you're in trouble. And you, well, let's just say you're not known for holding your tongue, Samuel." The audience gave a scattered laugh, half nervous, half excited. Samuel blinked, slow and deliberate, then leaned forward just enough for his voice to drop into that unmistakable register that filled movie theaters for decades. "Joy, I've made a career out of saying exactly what I mean," he said. "People know that." Joy shrugged. "Sure, but I'm talking about comments you've made recently. Some people say they're a little harsh." He snorted, shaking his head. "People always say that." And then Joy crossed a line. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but in that way she often did, tossing out a comment with a quick tongue and assuming everyone would laugh it off. "Well," she said, "if you talked a little less like your characters do in those movies of yours, those angry, loud, swear-filled monologues, you might avoid some of the backlash." The room shifted, physically shifted. A couple audience members gasped. Sunny blinked twice, taken aback. Whoopi shot Joy a look that clearly said, "Did you just?" Samuel froze. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just stillness, sharp as a blade. Slowly, he sat back in his chair, and the flicker in his eyes changed from playful amusement to a slow-burning irritation. "Say that again," he asked quietly. Joy's smile faltered. "Oh, relax, Samuel. I'm just saying, sometimes you come off a little." He leaned forward. "No, I heard what you said. I want you to repeat it." Whoopi stepped in, her voice suddenly lighter than usual. Okay, let's." But he didn't look away from Joy. "Repeat it," he said, voice calm but dangerously steady. Joy swallowed. "I said sometimes you talk like those characters of yours. You know, the shouty ones. The ones always cursing." Action froze around them. Even the audience didn't seem to breathe. Samuel exhaled a slow, controlled breath. "Joy," he said, voice lowering even further. "Watch your mouth." A sound rose from the audience, half gasp, half applause, but no one knew whether they should cheer or stay silent. Joy's eyes widened, stunned. She wasn't used to guests pushing back, especially not with a tone that carried the force of a man who'd played generals, hitmen, legends, and survivors. "Excuse me," she said, blinking rapidly. "You heard me," he said. "You don't get to tell me how I talk. You don't get to reduce decades of my work to some stereotype you think is funny." Joy opened her mouth, but the words got stuck. It wasn't fear, but shock, real shock, like suddenly she'd realized there was a boundary she had crossed without even noticing. Whoopi jumped in before the moment exploded completely. Listen, let's not get off track." But the tension had already gripped the studio. The audience watched every movement, every breath. The camera operators adjusted angles rapidly, capturing Samuel's controlled fury, Joy's disbelief, the rising storm of conflict that no one expected but everyone was now locked into. "Samuel," Joy said, trying to regain footing. "I was just joking." He shook his head firm. "No, you were making a point. A wrong one. And you need to be more careful before you decide how someone should speak." Joy's cheeks flushed a deeper red. "I didn't mean it that way." He didn't blink. But that's how it sounded. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost palpable, like the studio itself had stopped spinning. And somewhere in that tension, in that fragile space between pride and confrontation, the next moment hovered, ready to launch the interview into a firestorm no one could have predicted. The air was no longer just thick. It was volatile, ready to erupt. And everyone knew it. Part 2 continues the moment the tension breaks wide open. Joy sat there, frozen for a moment, blinking behind her glasses as if the studio lights had suddenly gotten brighter. She wasn't used to being checked, especially not on live television, and especially not by a Hollywood powerhouse who wasn't intimidated by the platform she sat on. The silence stretched a second too long, just enough for the audience to feel the temperature drop. Sunny Hostin shifted in her seat, her posture tightening with that instinctive attorney's awareness of conflict brewing on the horizon. Sarah Haynes bit her lower lip, searching for a segue but knowing too well there wasn't one strong enough to break the tension. Meanwhile, Whoopi Goldberg leaned back, her expression a mixture of concern and recognition. She'd seen storms like this before on the show, just not with this level of intensity. "Samuel," Joy finally said, trying to regain her footing with a shaky laugh. "Come on. You know I wasn't trying to offend you." He didn't laugh. He didn't soften. He didn't shift an inch. "What you meant doesn't undo what you said," he replied, voice even but simmering. "Words matter, Joy. And when you tell a black man that he talks like his angry movie characters, it's not just a joke. It's a stereotype. A tired one." The audience let out a ripple of murmurs, the kind that crawled across the rows like electricity. A few people even whispered, "Wow," hands flying to their mouths as they watched the confrontation unfold frame by frame. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it again. Rarely in her career had she been confronted like this, and certainly not in such a direct, unfiltered way. She lifted her chin, attempting to regain her familiar authority. "Well," she said, forcing a small smile, "I didn't think my comment would be taken that seriously." Samuel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his gaze piercing. "That's the problem. You didn't think." The audience reacted with a collective inhale, followed by scattered claps from people who clearly felt the weight of what he had just said. Joy's eyebrows shot up, her face flushing deeper, her composure thinning like paper near a flame. Whoopi jumped in with a hand raised gently. "All right, let's slow down," she said, her tone neutral but firm. "We don't want this to turn into something it doesn't need to be." Samuel didn't look away from Joy. It already turned into something. Joy tapped her cards against the table, a nervous, restless rhythm. "I think you're being overly sensitive," she said quietly, and the moment the words left her mouth, she seemed to realize how much worse they made everything. Samuel's shoulders tensed, and he sat up straighter. "Sensitive?" he repeated, but this time there was a colder edge to it. "Don't do that. Don't act like you're the victim here." The audience gasped again, sharp, dramatic, perfect for the live cameras. Someone from the back shouted, "Let him speak," and the energy in the room spiked, teetering between chaos and spectacle. Joy inhaled sharply. "I'm not acting like a victim," she insisted. "I'm just saying, this is a talk show, Samuel. We joke, we criticize, we discuss things." "Yeah," he said. "And you crossed a line while discussing me." The tension rippled across the set like a shockwave, tightening every muscle on every host's face. Sarah finally cleared her throat, breaking her silence for the first time since this began. "Maybe we should just redirect to the film." But Samuel shook his head immediately. "No, because this," he said, gesturing between himself and Joy. This is real. This is the kind of thing people watch because it tells them what we still have to deal with. Joy looked down at her cards, but her hands trembled slightly. Barely noticeable, yet the cameras would catch it without mercy. She swallowed, her voice quieter when she spoke again. I didn't intend for it to sound the way it did, she said, not quite an apology but not entirely defensive either. I was thinking about your characters. You know, the intense ones. The ones who shout a lot. It wasn't about anything else. Samuel's eyes softened for half a second, but only half a second. Joy, he said slowly, I know my characters shout. I know I've built a reputation around intensity, but that doesn't give anyone license to weaponize that in real life. I'm not my characters. And when you imply that I talk like some caricature of myself, yeah, I'm going to call it out. Sunny stepped in next, voice measured and calm. Joy, I think what Samuel is saying, she said gently, is that even unintended comments can hit sensitive areas, especially when they reinforce certain tropes. Joy sighed, long, heavy, the sigh of someone backed into a corner, but trying to find the right escape without completely surrendering. I understand that, she said, though her tone made it clear she was still processing the weight of the situation. That's all I'm saying, Samuel added. Just think before you talk, especially on live TV. Joy opened her mouth to respond, but suddenly, a loud voice came from the audience. A woman near the front row stood up, cupping her hands around her mouth. She always does this, the woman yelled. Let him finish. He's right. Security immediately stepped forward, gesturing for her to sit, but the room had already erupted. People clapped, others murmured. A few groaned in frustration at the disruption. The energy soared, and none of the hosts could pretend this wasn't a wildfire now. Joy looked stunned, not at Samuel this time, but at the audience's reaction. Her eyes darted across the room, taking in the shifting dynamics, the clear divide between those who supported her and those who didn't. Whoopi stepped in quickly. Everyone, let's keep it together, she said firmly, trying to maintain the show's structure. We're having a discussion. Let's not make this a shouting match. But Samuel looked back at Joy with that same unwavering stare, a stare that conveyed not anger, but truth, raw, uncomfortable, undeniable truth. I didn't come here to fight, he said finally. But I'm not going to let something like that slide. Not anymore. Joy swallowed, then nodded once, slow, reluctant, acknowledging the reality she couldn't push away. I hear you, she said softly. For a brief moment, the studio fell into a strange quiet, like everyone was adjusting to the new atmosphere created by the confrontation. But underneath that quiet was a simmering energy, a sense that something even bigger was coming next. Samuel shifted in his chair, exhaling as though releasing a pressure that had built far too quickly. Joy straightened her cards again, hands still trembling slightly, and Sunny's eyes darted nervously between the two of them. Sarah held her breath, and Whoopi tapped her pen on the table, trying to regain rhythm. But the calm didn't last. It never does on The View. Because the moment Joy tried to change the subject, Samuel realized she still didn't understand. And that's when things truly exploded. Joy shuffled her cards as if rearranging them could rearrange the tension still hanging in the air. Her fingers fumbled slightly, betraying nerves she didn't want the camera to see. She inhaled deeply, straightening up with a practiced broadcast smile that looked fragile around the edges. So, she began, trying to shift her tone to something lighter. Your new movie. Samuel let out a slow, deliberate exhale that cut her sentence clean in half. Joy, he said, and the studio froze all over again. She looked up at him, startled. What now? He leaned forward in his chair, fingers interlocked, elbows on his knees. His eyes, sharp, focused, held her in place. You're trying to move on before actually addressing what happened. Joy blinked. I said I heard you. You heard me, he said, but you didn't acknowledge anything. The audience buzzed, soft murmurs spreading from row to row, people leaning in as if trying to feel the weight of each word. Joy shifted her jaw, her frustration simmering beneath her controlled expression. I don't know what else you want me to say, she replied. We're live. We have topics to cover. Sunny Hostin, sensing the tension rising again, quietly whispered something to Sarah, but the message didn't matter. The energy had shifted. Everyone could feel the storm returning. Samuel shook his head. This isn't about time or topics, he said calmly. This is about respect. When you say something out of pocket, and someone tells you why it's wrong, you don't just shrug and move on. Joy's lips tightened. Are you expecting me to apologize? He didn't hesitate. I'm expecting accountability. A few people in the audience clapped instinctively, quickly followed by others until the studio pulsed with reaction. Joy stared ahead, stunned by the applause supporting him. Her face flushed again, a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. Whoopi Goldberg raised her hands, trying to cool the moment. All right, this isn't court, she said. We're all just trying to talk here. But Samuel wasn't finished. Joy, he continued, you've been in this business a long time. You know words can cut deeper than you realize. You also know when something you said landed wrong. Joy rubbed her temples. Okay, but you're acting like I insulted you personally. It was just commentary on your roles. You compared me to my loudest characters, Samuel replied. My angriest ones. And you said it in a tone that implied I couldn't control myself outside of them. I didn't say that, she snapped. You implied it, he shot back. Joy pressed her lips together, visibly agitated. I think you're reading too much into this. Sunny leaned forward, palms open. Joy, even if you didn't mean it that way, you can still acknowledge why it might come across differently from how you intended. Joy's gaze darted toward Sunny, then away. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed, her pride wrestling with the reality unfolding in front of her. Finally, she shook her head. I don't like being painted as someone I'm not, she said, voice tense. I'm not racist. I'm not insensitive. I'm not trying to tear anyone down. No one said you were, Samuel replied. But you don't get to hide behind what you meant when someone tells you how it landed. The audience murmured again, this time with a tone of agreement, as though the collective conscience of the room had awakened and chosen a side. Joy opened her mouth to speak, but another audience voice cut through the space, loud, raw, unfiltered. He's right, a man shouted. Just own it. Joy's head whipped toward the direction of the voice. I am owning it, she snapped back. I said I didn't mean it that way. Intent is an impact, someone else yelled, and the audience erupted into a cascade of noise, cheers, claps, shouts, gasps. It was no longer a studio audience. It was a live battleground. Security motioned for quiet, but the energy was out of the box now, impossible to shove back in. Joy's eyes widened in disbelief. I'm being attacked by the audience now, she said, half laughing in shock. This is ridiculous. Whoopi stepped in, raising her voice. Everyone calm down. Calm down. The room dimmed by a fraction, the noise tapering off into uneasy quiet. Samuel watched Joy, calm, unwavering, not smug, not triumphant, just grounded in his truth. This isn't about attacking you, he said evenly. It's about awareness. Growth. If you say something that hurts someone, even unintentionally, the adult response is to say, I'm sorry I made you feel that way. Joy's arms crossed, her posture stiff. And what about when I'm hurt? She challenged. What about when people jump on me for every tiny thing I say? People expect perfection from us. They wait for a slip so they can pounce. Her voice cracked slightly, anger mixed with exhaustion, frustration mixed with vulnerability. For the first time, Samuel's expression shifted. He paused, studying her. Something softened ever so slightly in his eyes. You think I don't know what that's like? He asked quietly. Joy looked up, surprised. Samuel continued, tone steady but now layered with familiarity. People have judged me my entire life, for how I talk, how I look, the roles I take, the ones I don't. You're not the only one under a microscope. Joy blinked hard, caught somewhere between defensiveness and recognition. But, he added firmly, the difference is this. When I mess up, I own it. Joy exhaled, long and unsteady. So what? She asked. You want an apology? He held her gaze. I want sincerity. Joy's eyes flickered downward, her breathing uneven. The room waited, every host, every audience member, every unseen viewer watching through the lens of 100 cameras. This was the heartbeat moment. The pivot point. Whoopi pressed her palms together. Joy. Joy lifted a hand, stopping her. She looked at Samuel. Really looked at him for the first time since the conversation began. I didn't mean to make you feel stereotyped, she said softly. And I'm sorry if I did. Truly. Samuel gave a single, slow nod. Not too quick, not too forgiving, but acknowledging the shift. The audience reacted with gentle applause, not explosive this time, but warm, relieved. A collective breath released into the room. But just as the tension began to ease, just as the hosts exhaled, believing the storm had finally calmed, Joy made one more comment. One more careless, unchecked, unfiltered sentence. Well, she said casually, forcing a laugh, at least you didn't curse me out. I half expected a Samuel L. Jackson trademark here. The audience gasped so loudly it sounded like the entire room inhaled at once. Samuel stiffened. Slowly, incredulously, he turned toward her. What did I just say? And the storm returned. Part 4 will deliver the explosion, aftermath, fallout, and end with the powerful call to action you requested. The room froze. Time didn't just slow. It collapsed into a single, sharp moment where every eye snapped toward Samuel, every breath in the studio tangled in midair. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, as if unsure whether to push in or pull back. Samuel's jaw tightened. Not with theatrical anger. Not with the fiery, movie-style rage Joy had just joked about. No, this was deeper, colder, sharper. He turned to her fully, shoulders squared, eyes steady and unblinking. Joy, he said, voice low and deliberate. That's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. Joy blinked, suddenly realizing what she had said. How casually, how reflexively, and the blood drained from her face. I was joking, she whispered, as if the softness of her voice would soften the impact. That's the problem, Samuel replied. You think everything is a joke. The audience erupted, not with applause this time, but with a sharp, collective gasp. Whispering currents surged through the rows like wind breaking against rocks. Sarah Haynes covered her mouth. Sunny Hostin shut her eyes, shaking her head. Whoopi muttered, "Oh Lord," under her breath. Joy looked around, overwhelmed by the shifting energy closing in on her. I didn't mean, she began. Samuel cut her off, not with anger, but with a sudden, startling clarity. You keep saying you didn't mean it. But Joy, he leaned in, expression heavy with disappointment. At some point, you have to realize it doesn't matter what you meant. It matters what you revealed. Joy swallowed hard, her throat tight. This is who you default to when you're uncomfortable, Samuel continued. A stereotype. A punchline. Something you can hide behind, because it's easier than taking responsibility for the words coming out of your mouth. His voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It didn't lash out. It simply hit, precise, undeniable, final. Joy's eyes glistened. The sheen of someone who suddenly felt naked in her own chair. The audience shifted, uncomfortable but unable to look away. Several people murmured, he's right. Others just stared wide-eyed, sensing they were watching a moment that would go viral within minutes of airing. Whoopi leaned forward, voice low but stern. Joy, you walked right into that one. Joy let out a shaky exhale, her hand pressed to her chest. I wasn't trying to, she stopped. The sentence died in her throat. She looked at Samuel, then down at the table. I didn't mean to insult you again. Honestly. Her voice cracked, just slightly. I thought maybe humor would ease the tension. And instead, Samuel replied, you made it worse. The silence that followed was suffocating. Joy nodded slowly, her shoulders sinking. For once, she didn't try to argue. She didn't try to deflect. She didn't try to reclaim the moment with a punchline. She simply sat there, the weight of her own words settling onto her like a heavy, undeniable truth. Sunny spoke next, gentle, grounding, the voice of reason in a room sewn together by frayed edges. I think what we're all witnessing, she said, is a moment where intention and impact collided in real time. And that's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for Joy. It's uncomfortable for Samuel. It's uncomfortable for all of us. The audience murmured in agreement. But uncomfortable conversations, Sunny continued, are often the ones we need most. Samuel nodded slightly, appreciating the sentiment without looking away from Joy. I don't want you to feel attacked, he said. I want you to understand. Joy inhaled shakily. I do, she whispered. Samuel leaned back, his posture finally relaxing for the first time since the confrontation began. Good. But the moment wasn't over. Not even close. Because the audience, fired up, shaken, emotional, was ready to weigh in. A woman in the second row stood up, voice trembling but passionate. Joy, with all due respect, this isn't the first time something like this has happened. People are tired of excuses. Joy looked stunned, her eyes widening. I know, she said softly. A man further back called out. But we appreciate the apology. Just be better. The audience clapped, but it wasn't a mocking applause. It was warm, hopeful, acknowledging. Even Joy, despite her shaken state, seemed to absorb the sincerity of it. She nodded once more, wiping the corner of her eye discreetly. I will, she said quietly. I really will. Whoopi finally stepped forward with the authority of someone who'd led 1,000 storms. All right, she said, leaning into her mic, this is the view. We talk. We argue. We stop. We listen. And sometimes we learn something about ourselves in the middle of all the chaos. She turned toward Samuel. Thank you for saying what needed to be said. Samuel gave a respectful nod. She turned toward Joy. And thank you for not running away from the conversation. Joy let out a small, tired laugh. Like I could even if I wanted to. The studio erupted in light applause, this time not explosive, not dramatic, but healing. Cleansing. Like the first breeze after a storm that almost tore the roof off. Samuel finally leaned back in his chair, the tension leaving him entirely. Joy uncrossed her arms, her hands flat against the table as if grounding herself, tethering to something real. Sarah and Sunny exchanged a subtle, relieved glance. The moment, the confrontation, the clash, the emotional unraveling, had transformed into something rare, a live television reckoning, honest and raw. Whoopi exhaled. Okay, now, she said, clapping her hands lightly, let's try to talk about this movie before Jackson walks off set. Samuel laughed, a real, full laugh, and the audience joined in, the room softened at last. But even as they moved on to the movie promo, the tension from earlier still lingered in the air like smoke from a fire. The cameras captured every residual emotion, every flicker of thought across Joy's face. Every moment Samuel spoke with a calmness that seemed newly earned. And as the segment wrapped, the energy in the room had shifted completely. Something that started as a comedic jab had turned into a public lesson, a viral moment, an instant headline. As the outro music kicked in, the audience rose to their feet, applauding one of the most intense interviews in the show's history. The credits rolled. The lights dimmed. But the conversation had only just begun. Because within minutes, social media exploded. Hashtag Samuel L. Jackson. Hashtag Joy Behar. Hashtag The View Meltdown. Hashtag Watch Your Mouth. Clips circulating, commentary erupting, thousands of comments pouring in. People chose sides. People debated. People analyzed every word, every pause, every breath. And in the center of it all was this moment. This confrontation. This truth. And as the story dominated the internet, one question echoed across every platform. Who was right? And who crossed the line? Now it's your turn.